Our heroine was said to be a vain woman who sold her beauty to become the Duke's most extravagant woman. This is how Rowena Falone, the Duke of Devonshire's mistress, was seen. The lady sat in front of the mirror and made herself beautiful. She took the powder with a sponge and applied it to her face. The other ladies were discussing her without suspecting that she could hear them. The theme was her purse and dress. One said that such a dress was from the Harden studio, and the wait for it was 3 months. They also discussed her earrings and necklace, that they were like treasures that were passed down from generation to generation. They thought it was funny that men were delighted with this lady. They whispered that this woman knew no honor, that even if it was well packaged, it was a one-day-old moth, and they were even ashamed of this vulgar woman. The servant swallowed nervously and called Miss Falone. He told the woman that his lordship was already waiting for her in the carriage, called her to hurry up. Our heroine stood up and swam languidly like a swan to spite all the ladies. Her green eyes were incredible. The coachman briefly greeted the woman. He held the reins ready to set off immediately. Soon the carriage was racing along the cobbled street, harnessed to 4 noble animals. The woman sat on a soft seat opposite the man. She looked sadly out the window. The carriage shook and rumbled. The man asked in surprise why she didn't complain to him this time. His voice brought Rowena out of her reverie. He asked if she did what she was told. The speaker's face was stony. It was Killian Devonshire. The woman was sorry if he was uncomfortable. She assured that she had no complaints. She understood that he was busy and thanked him for his time. Rowena said that today's performance was really good. But then the man interrupted her, roughly grabbing her chin with his hand. She squealed. Killian asked why she was squealing. He asked me to tell him whether he should look his mistress in the eyes now. The woman remembered the words that were whispered behind her back. She replied that she was a little tired, and she apologized if it bothered him. The Duke said that if she knew that she had made a mistake, then she accordingly understood that she must now be punished. He extended his gloved hand and asked to take it off. The woman did not understand that he wanted her. He shook his hand. Rowena quickly reached out her hands to the man's hand. He pushed them away with a pop. Then he put his finger to the tip, letting her know how she should do it. The man asked her to pull his glove with her mouth and take it off. She was surprised and pressed her hand to herself. The woman's heart was ready to jump out of her chest. She squeezed her hand and pressed it to her chest. The Duke was surprised that Miss Falone did not like his idea. He said that if she didn't like it, then... But she interrupted him. She promised to fulfill his request. Her face was upset. The man chuckled contentedly, and he extended his hand again, and the girl bent down, preparing to grab his glove with her teeth and pull. Soon the glove slipped off the man's hand. He licked his lips lustfully. This excited him. The Duke touched the woman's cheeks with his hand. She shuddered, and her heart beat even faster in her chest. Soon Killian began to kiss her lips and leaned his whole body on top, taking the position on top. The mansion was generously warmed by the bright afternoon sun. The maid was combing the woman's wheaten hair in front of the dressing table. She supposed the Duke must have had a good day, just like he gave bouquets and shoes to the lady. She asked how Lady Rowena liked the performance. The woman replied that she liked it. The maid said that she was so jealous of her. Ordinary people like her could collect 3 months' salary and buy a ticket. This was the diva's first performance. She said that her brother ridiculed her to her face, but once upon a time she so wanted to become an opera actress. The maid asked the mistress what her childhood dream was. The brush rustled through golden hair. Rowena thought about it. She answered with a pause and a chuckle that she had once wanted to be a novel writer. The maid remembered that the lady had once said that her maternal uncle was a famous writer. The woman confirmed, saying his name was Jeremy Dish. The man with wheat hair told Rowena that if things got hard for her, she should come back. The young girl promised her uncle that she would do so. The maid remembered that he was a writer of detective thrillers. She assured that she had heard his name many times. He said that he was hiding so he did not appear in public. The maid asked what happened, and if Rowena looks like a young lady, then he must be middle-aged. The blonde said she didn't know, that perhaps she would never meet him again. The last time our heroine saw her uncle was 3 years ago. She was on the verge of going to the capital and becoming a novelist, and if she had not then accidentally met the Duke on the approaching train, everything could have been as planned. And if she had not trusted her friend who called her to the capital. There was a knock on the door interrupting her memories. An elderly maid asked permission to enter, assuring that she wanted to tell her something important. The lady told her to come in. The door opened and heavy footsteps were heard. Miss Gertrude, the manager of the mansion, entered. She said that the reason she came early in the morning was to move Miss Falone to Rockford. The blonde was surprised. After all, the social season has not yet begun. The manager reported that the schedule had moved forward. Rowena was worried that something might happen. She asked if the Duke would go with them. The lady answered briefly, "No." Our heroine gasped and sighed, and she unobtrusively wondered why the Duke would not go with her. Miss Gertrude said that she would order the maid to start getting ready tomorrow, and asked the mistress to get ready too, that they leave for Roquefort by lunchtime the next day. Having already turned around and leaving, the lady remembered and looked back and said that a letter had arrived, handing the envelope to Rowena. She was told it was from the publisher. Our heroine opened her eyes wide. I was delighted and a little intrigued. She accepted the letter from their hands to the manager with words of gratitude. The young woman held the envelope in her hands with delight and anticipation of something new, and Miss Gertrude glared at her from under her glasses. The manager walked along a long corridor. The lock clicked as it opened. The door to Mr. Duke's office opened with a creak. The owner of the mansion was sitting at a long desk with business papers. The woman came closer and informed his lordship that she had conveyed his message to Miss Falone. He praised her for her work and allowed her to go. Gertrude hesitated for some time. She asked if it was time to send Miss away. The man turned the paper over, continuing to work. He asked what she meant. The woman swallowed the lump in her throat. She said that the Marchioness of Essex, his aunt, told her that the Queen had recently invited the daughter of a foreign magnate. It turns out that the princess is already ripe for marriage, and the aunt added that Killian probably knew what this should mean, since she considered him a smart person. The man looked up from his papers. He understood that his aunt had finally taken on the role of matchmaker, and he was interested in what she was trying to get in return for selling him. Gertrude was shocked. She reprimanded his lordship for such words, and Killian took off his glasses. He asked that Miss Falone had completed her task and was now useless. The Marchioness asked Killian if this was his way of rebelling against her, and he pretended not to understand what she meant. The woman claimed that she noticed the resemblance between his mistress and his late fiancé. The man insisted that he was not interested in the dead woman, and Rowena Falone will never become a duchess, and she will never bear him children. Aunt did not understand what he wanted. Killian shook the glass in his hand. He insisted that he wanted her to stop trying to match him with foreign princesses and heiresses. The man raised his glass. The Marquise said it was very good. She was sure that in any case he was never interested in one thing for long. And at this moment, Rowena Falone was recognized as the woman of the Duke of Devonshire. However, 3 years later, he thought the Queen must have begun to worry, because he showed no signs that he was going to send his mistress away. The man tiredly stretched his neck. The manager said that according to rumors, the heiress also had blonde hair and green eyes, that the Marchioness saw her in person, and said that the heiress resembled his late bride even more than Miss Falone. The man covered his face with his hand and began to laugh. The manager was surprised with his lordship. The Duke opened his eyes and looked intently at his maid. He told Gertrude, grinning, that he didn't even remember the dead woman's face. The man said to himself that everyone thought he was in love with someone, and he saw her only once when he was young, and he couldn't blame the ladies for that. After all, he actually met Rowena for the first time on the train returning from the woman's funeral. Gertrude was surprised that the Duke would not send Miss Falone away, even though she had outlived her usefulness. Killian insisted in a firm voice with a straight face that the thing she was talking about belonged to him, and he didn't understand why he had to abandon his precious pet. The woman was sure that her presence could prevent the Duke from finding his wife. The man said that his mother had died a long time ago. The maid shuddered. Then she bowed and asked her to forgive her. The Duke waved his hand and said that she could be free. She asked if she could say something else. Killian looked up tiredly from his papers. Gertrude said she suspected Miss Falone was looking for another man. The horses clopped their hooves rhythmically along the street. People were sitting and lying under the wall. The coachman stopped the carriage. There was a creaking sound. They drove up to one of those houses. Rowena clasped her hands with the letter and pressed it to her chest. She looked out the window with hope. The maid began to get nervous, and asked Miss if this wasn't Harlem Street. After all, she said that she was going to do some shopping at the store. She didn't understand why there were men's clothes in the lady's bag, and I didn't understand what was happening. Rowena grabbed the maid's hand. She promised Melissa to tell everything if she promised to keep it a secret. When the heroine's parents went on their long-awaited honeymoon, they contracted an infectious disease and died soon after. No one volunteered to take care of the orphan, until her mother's younger brother, Uncle Jeremy, decided to take the girl with him, and she spent the next 20 years in the remote countryside. And when Rowena reached adulthood, she received one letter. In it, a friend suggested that she send her work to a publisher and wait for the results at his home, inviting her to his place. After that, the girl recklessly boarded a train that was heading to the capital, to a place where she had never been before. The girl found that house at the specified address. She opened the door with a creak and called the owner by name. But the house was empty, and there was an envelope on the table. It all turned out to be a trap. When she read the message addressed to her, she was overcome with despair. Her friend left a huge debt in her name. She was like a lonely flower growing on the road. Overnight, the girl discovered that debt collectors were hunting her. She ran away and they shouted after her, "Stop!" She ran as fast as she could. In that letter, the comrade said that he had no choice, and her uncle made a lot of money from his novels, so she could ask him to pay off the debt for her. The girl ran as fast as she could. She closed her eyes in fear. Her uncle tried to dissuade her from moving to the capital, and the girl didn't have the courage to ask him for help. The men wondered how they could let her leave. It was believed that she could not have run far. They were going to comb the area and find her. The rain was dripping, flowing in rivulets from the girl's hair and clothes. She clutched a small suitcase with her things to herself, hiding from pursuit. She sat down on the ground in a breakdown and sobbed bitterly. And she already regretted that she had not listened to her uncle's advice then. Philona didn't even notice how the carriage drove up and a male voice called her by name. The door lock clicked. She raised her tear-stained eyes. Mr. Killian was coming out of the carriage towards her under an umbrella. That friend of hers from the train stood next to her under an umbrella in the pouring rain. The girl looked at him with wide eyes. After a short pause, he grabbed her hand, but Rowena tried to break away from him. She asked him to let him go. She said she had to go, but he asked the Duke if she could go where. Killian carefully draped his coat over her shoulders. The girl submitted to his will. He called her to come with him. Our heroine accepted his helping hand and went with him. The man hugged her and covered her with an umbrella. And that's how the girl ended up with the Duke, like the most elegant and vulgar woman. If only she had not believed her friend's letter, and if she had not followed him that night, perhaps she could start her relationship with Killian off on the right foot. The man has never been one to confess his love, but she knew that he loved her, and the girl loved him too. The couple made love, and he was dripping with sweat. Rowena wanted to succeed as a writer in order to repay her debt to the man and become his equal. Now the girl was telling all this to her maid in the carriage. To sum it up, she said that that's why she submitted her work to the publisher. The maid was surprised at such courage, but I didn't understand why the lady had to disguise herself as a man. Rowena explained that this was a precaution. After all, she might run into someone who might recognize her. The girl said that this would be their little secret in any case, and the maid promised Miss that she would not tell it to anyone. A young guy, Rowena in disguise, in a cap, was sitting on the sofa opposite the man. They had a conversation over a cup of tea. The man introduced himself as William Zenon, the director of this publishing company. The guy introduced himself as Philip McCarthy. William said he would get straight to the point. He insisted that he liked this draft, but I thought it could have been changed a little. He thought the text itself was great, but the story was a little difficult to understand, and the places visited by the main character seemed too small. The director of the publishing house assured that an excellent job had been done, and believed that the girls would be enchanted. But he thought the wider public would be interested in crowded bars and parks. I thought that such places would be more familiar to the average reader. The green-eyed guy sat with a sad face. He said with a bow that he himself had never been to such places. The director assured that now he had a chance to experience it for himself. The man said as he stood up that he wished to meet him tomorrow at noon in Conwell Park. He apologetically assured that he had another meeting scheduled immediately after this, and said goodbye. When the guy was already leaving, William reminded him that their next meeting would be tomorrow in the park. Philip tried to answer something, but they didn't listen to him anymore. Our heroine, dressed in men's clothing, collapsed onto the soft seat of the carriage. The maid asked her how everything went and whether they signed a contract with her. The girl wearily took off the visor from her head. She replied that they didn't sign. They asked her what they talked about. Rowena said that she did not want to go into details now, but promised to tell everything later, and the carriage left that place abandoned by God. The Duke's mansion was brightly lit. One of its windows was wide open. Duke Killian Devonshire himself was generous to his mistress. He was patient enough to overlook small mistakes, and always talked to her and treated her with a certain level of respect, despite her lower origins. Moreover, the Duke never kept Rowena locked up, and did not forbid her to ever leave the castle. But there was one rule that she could never break. The carriage was driving down the street, and this rule was that Rowena had to wait for the Duke in the bedroom when he returned home. Gertrude met the girl with a lantern in her hand. At that hour, it was already starting to get dark. She said she was late. The girl asked for forgiveness. The manager said that the Duke was already waiting for Rowena. The girl twitched. She didn't expect him to return earlier today. She answered, clutching the hem of her dress, that she must first get herself in order. But Gertrude conveyed the order that she should immediately come to the master as soon as she returned. The man was sitting lounging on the sofa. There was an open bottle of wine on the table in front of him, and in his hand was a glass from which he took a steady sip of the intoxicating drink. The fire was crackling brightly in the fireplace. On the table next to the wine bottle lay a corkscrew and a cork. A woman's dress lay on the upholstered furniture. There was a knock on the door. They asked his lordship's permission to enter. He told her to come in. The girl opened the door and timidly entered the room. The man turned his head in her direction. The girl looked at him with frightened eyes. She was surprised that he returned so early, and she timidly took another step closer. He replied that sometimes it happens, and patted the sofa next to him with his hand. Rowena took a quick look and thought that he must have just returned, because he had not yet had time to change his clothes, and she asked why he drinks alone. The Duke took the bottle in his hand and began to pour a thin stream into the glass. He said that he once had a dog. This dog was given to him by the Queen herself. It was a beautiful hound with shiny black fur. The bitch was graceful and smart enough. She understood all his commands. The man passed the glass to Rowena. Killian insisted that she was the perfect bitch. The girl listened carefully, and the man pricked a piece of cheese on a fork and brought it into her mouth. For some time the Duke watched the girl chew. He said that that dog was so smart that it brought back the birds he shot even before he ordered it to do so. He said that one day something happened. She broke free and ran away. The girl asked if she ever returned. The man confirmed it. He said that this did not happen until she mated with some mongrel and became pregnant. The dog's belly was bulging. She rubbed her muzzle against her owner's leg as if nothing had happened. The girl gasped, imagining the cute puppies. The Duke narrowed his eyes and took a sip from his glass of more wine. He said that he began to wait until the dog gave birth. And then I found a mongrel that looked like those puppies. And he killed them all in front of his dog. Rowena's face changed. The Duke said that then his dog tried to bite, so he killed it too. That's why he hasn't had any more dogs since then. Killian told Miss Falone that he showed no mercy to the dog who betrayed him. The girl thought that the Duke knew about her trip to the publishing company this morning. The man said that if it had been no more than a momentary indiscretion, he could have ignored it. And as he was leaving, he said that it looked like her move to Rockford would have to be postponed a little to another time. He said that he would be very busy soon, so he planned not to stay here for long. The Duke expressed the hope that Rowena would be a good girl until the ball was over. The man left and the lock on the door clicked, and the girl was left sitting alone, deep in thought. Birds chirped cheerfully near the Duke's mansion. The maid pulled back the curtains on the windows, letting light into the room. She said it was time for Miss Rowena to get up. The girl covered her eyes with her hand from the bright light. I asked Melissa not to do that, but she reminded me that today the lady had a meeting and it was soon noon. The maid reminded her that the girl needed to meet someone from the publishing house in the park today. Rowena yawned and remembered that she had not told the maid that she was going to that meeting. The girl said, straightening her hair behind her ear, that on reflection she decided that she shouldn't have gone there, that the Duke was already dissatisfied with her, and she didn't want to make things worse by doing something that could be misinterpreted. Melissa wanted to confess something to her mistress. She looked guilty. She admitted that she had read her manuscript yesterday. Not the version that she brought to the publishing house, but the other one, the one that was in her bag. I asked forgiveness for this. Rowena assured that it was not worth it and everything was fine. The maid grabbed the girl's hands. She told Miss Rowena that perhaps she didn't understand writing, but I wanted to say that the girl is exceptionally talented, and she wishes she didn't miss this rare opportunity. After all, perhaps they could record it today? Our heroine didn't know what to say, but the maid continued to persuade her that perhaps this was her only chance, and if she returned to Rockford, she would have to stay there for a long time. Rowena took her maid by the shoulder. She said that she was probably right, and she should have gone to that meeting. The girl urged us to do this together. Melissa said she shouldn't be at the meeting. An important issue could be discussed there. And she asked Rowena not to worry. What if she told her where she was meeting, she would accompany her on the way there and back, so that Madame Gertrude does not suspect anything. The girl was happy and thanked the maid Melissa, clapping her hands like a child from excess emotion. At noon, a couple we already knew were sitting on a bench, the director of the publishing house and a young blonde guy. Soon they got up and left. The older one drove. He pointed the way with a finger, businesslike, holding another in his pocket. They approached from a cafe nearby. The man was telling something, actively gesturing, and the guy stood with his mouth open in surprise. William Zeno, wiping his mouth after a snack. He continued by saying that this is what a typical date consists of. In front of Philip was untouched food and cutlery. The director of the publishing house put the envelope on the table. He said it was a contract. The guy was surprised, but he thought that his story was not very pleasant. The man said that he nevertheless liked the mood and style of writing. Meanwhile, he took out a wrapped rose flower from his inner pocket. And besides, the guy accepted his offer and came here today. This meant that he had great potential for growth, and he handed the flower to his interlocutor. Philip wondered why he gave him a flower. The man replied that he wanted to congratulate him on signing the contract, of course. The guy asked if he gave everyone a flower. The man replied that this was the first contract, and every time a writer signed a contract with him for the first time, he gave him a rose. Philip said he was embarrassed, and he accepted the flower with gratitude. The director of the publishing house said that after he put a stamp on the contract, they agreed to continue communicating through Melissa. And that was the end of their business today. Our heroine was sitting at the table and quickly writing something on paper. Melissa brought her a snack on a tray. She asked Miss Rowena how the writing was going. She assured that she was almost finished. The maid said that according to Madame Gertrude, the Duke was not in the capital at the moment. The girl took a sip of tea from a cup. Melissa thought that this was good, since the lady had more time to work on the manuscript. But it was strange that there had been no news from the Duke for a week. After all, when he left for a long time, he informed about it in advance, or he definitely contacted Miss Rowena. And now it seemed strange. She reassured herself that he could be very busy. Our heroine lay alone on the bed for a long time. She spun around without sleep. She was haunted by thoughts of how things were going with the Duke. At some point, she realized that she wanted to drink some water. She got out of bed and walked to the door. But when she was about to take the handle, she heard voices, stopped, and began to listen to them. One maid said that she heard that Duke Killian was present at yesterday's banquet with Count Vanessa's second daughter. What we heard hurt our heroine's heart. The speaker continued that, given the gentleman's age, she would not be at all surprised if this time the Duke was seriously planning to get married. Another said that to this day the gentleman's aunt, the Marchioness of Essex, manages the country house on his behalf, but she was already old, and it was unclear what would happen to Miss Falloon. The third was sure that the girl would be paid a good sum, so that she would leave the life and house of the Duke forever. The maid believed that there was something that could not be discussed openly, but no one in their right mind would give their daughter to someone who has a mistress living in their house. Our heroine's heart almost jumped out. The maid believed that no nobleman would cause a scandal. The first insisted that the queen wanted her nephew to marry someone better than the count's daughter. The third was sure that Killian was still in love with his fiancée, who died 3 years ago, and so all this time he remained unmarried. The first one said that according to rumors that woman was amazing, and she sighed that the gentleman still could not forget his first love. The third squealed with delight and said that it all sounded so romantic, and our heroine was reeling from what she accidentally overheard. The maids heard a noise outside the door, and they were seriously scared. The first one asked what the sound was, and this was the thunder of a bucket, accidentally knocked over by Rowena. The 3 girls guessed that someone was behind that door. One admitted that it could be Mrs. Rowena. Another doubted it, but volunteered to go check it out. The girl approached the door and asked if there was anyone behind her. Rowena stumbled in fear of being discovered. Miss was wondering what to do. After all, the maids will notice her anyway. The situation was resolved by Miss Gertrude suddenly appearing at the noise. She asked why they were all here instead of working. The maids bowed and asked for forgiveness. They said they were just talking. The lady insisted that whatever they were talking about, they should have been quieter. The girls asked to forgive them. Miss Gertrude pushed the door. Through the crack, Rowena saw the old face of the manager of the Duke's mansion. Her heart beat faster and faster, and she herself tried not to even breathe. The headmaid opened the doors wide, but I didn't see anyone behind them. There was complete silence in the room. The lady adjusted her glasses on her nose. She told the young maids that if she caught them again, it would be their last day here. The maids answered in unison that they understood everything. The manager ordered the girl to return to work, and Rowena hid behind the door, covering her mouth, afraid to take an extra breath. And when Gertrude left, only then did the girl sigh calmly. She learned something new by accidentally overhearing the maids talking. The carriage drove up to the publishing house. In the carriage, Melissa wished Miss Rowena good luck. She said that when she published her first book, she would expect a copy from her. Fragile legs and heavy men's boots climbed the stairs. The girl recalled that conversation between the maids. With such thoughts and a sad face, our heroine appeared dressed as a guy at the publishing house that day. She reassured herself that it was just a rumor. She lived as Killian's mistress for 3 years, and I never noticed any signs that he had forgotten his first love. In fact, he loved her alone. The man played with her hair. He hand-fed her sweets, gave her rare beauty jewelry, admired her charms. The Duke used to walk with her in the park. They went to the hippodrome together. And the man tried to appear with her in public. When it got cold in the evenings, Killian gave the girl his cloak, protecting her from the cold wind, and she pulled it tighter over herself. Williams asked if the guy had thought about his offer. The blonde was in a hurry to take something out of his bag. He held out a stack of papers. He said he thought about it a lot, and I agreed to cooperate on such conditions. The director of the publishing house took a look at the brought manuscripts. Previously, Miss Gertrude had given Williams a significant wad of money. He said that she needed him to pretend. The man asked again, not understanding what he was talking about. The lady adjusted her glasses. She said it was all quite simple. And now the man admitted to himself that this lady's manuscripts were much better than he had imagined. But in this world, money was everything. He considered the girl a poor thing. Williams touched his hand to the stack of manuscripts. He said that this was all wonderful. He assured that as soon as editing was completed, they would be able to publish it immediately. Philip beamed with joy. The man went to the window and pushed the shutters. He said that he wasn't joking and that everything would really happen that way. Below, Williams saw a guy who was clearly waiting for something. He immediately turned away as if he was busy with something. He chuckled to himself. After all, he suspected that the girl would be persecuted. The guy who was waddling in the company of young people was clearly the center of attention. The waiter just left, having set the table for them, and escorted the guest into the hall. He made a hospitable gesture with his hand and asked Sir to come here. The man opened the door and a guy with a naked torso surrounded by girls appeared to his gaze. One nymph had asked the guy to say "am" and fed him an olive. The other one was giggling sweetly nearby. Here in our story, the illegitimate son of Count Felix appears on the scene. He was chewing an olive that had just been put into his mouth. His chest and neck were covered in woman's lipstick. He was surprised to see the Duke of Devonshire, and he asked how he owed such an honor. The waiter asked for forgiveness. Killian said accusingly that he could see that Felix was still living like trash. The guy could not understand why the guest was surprised. He kissed each girl and waved goodbye to them. They told him to call them again and run away. Felix threw his shirt over his shoulders. The Duke sat down on the sofa and asked what he had for him. The guy joked a little more and got down to business. He tightened the belt on his clothes. He assured that illegal import of alcohol was taking place in the southern port. The Duke said that he knew this. After the Queen banned the import of alcohol, only authorized persons could bring it into Esselwood. Smuggling alcohol was a serious crime. For this, all property was confiscated and even sentenced to death by guillotine. But some still tried to import alcohol despite all the risks. The reason was simple. It was a very profitable business. The guy remembered that the Duke told him to carefully find out about this, so he wasn't going to act like the secret police. The automatic lighter clicked. The Duke was lighting a cigarette. She hissed. He said that he wanted to take everything for himself. The guy couldn't believe it and asked him again. Felix was surprised that he was going to betray the Queen. He assured me that this was a huge risk and it was not for him to warn about this. He asked if his duke was not enough. Killian insisted that he was not interested in money. The interlocutor was completely confused and asked what was the point then. The room was filled with cigarette smoke. The Duke raised his hand and said that he was interested in the power that big money gives. He reported that he was interested in such power that no one would tell him what to do and when to do it, to keep everyone in your fist. Killian wanted power to rival that of the Queen. Everything was clear to Felix, that the Duke sought to strengthen his power in the shadows, but he reminded that he asked him to find out something else. But before that, the guy wanted to ask what it was about. The guy said, holding out the envelope, that the one in question was the president of the publishing house, that someone was watching them, and they went to the park and then to a restaurant with a miss disguised as a man. He couldn't understand why the lady was dressed like a man, and presumably they were talking about the manuscript. In the photo that was in the envelope, there was Williams with a guy with very similar features to Rowena. The Duke was finishing his cigarette. He said the pieces of the puzzle were finally fitting together. The Duke of Devonshire was getting into the carriage. The guy asked where my lord would order. He asked to be taken to where Miss Falone was. He also gave orders that someone was needed to keep an eye on Gertrude. The servant clarified that he wanted him to find a quiet and inconspicuous person, and he promised that it would be done. The guy took a while to write something down in a notebook with a pen. The Duke suddenly remembered that the Marchioness of Essex was coming today. He assumed that she had already arrived. Over the mansion of the Duke of Devonshire, the sunset gilded everything around. The windows in the house lit up with soft light. The street lights were shining brightly. An older lady in bright clothes and a dark hat with voluminous jewelry opened her arms to her nephew Killian. Behind her stood Gertrude and Rowena with their heads bowed. The aunt hugged her nephew. He asked how her whites were. She replied that it was wonderful and simply wonderful. The lady reported that she had a conversation with the Queen. At that time, Rowena still stood drooping. The man did not listen further to his aunt. He asked Miss Falone what was wrong with her, and he stepped towards her. The girl was clearly upset about something. She addressed him stuttering from suppressed tears. Killian looked at her face carefully. He asked the girl that someone had slapped her in the face. The lady told Rowena that her master asked her a question, but she only clutched the hem of her dress. Earlier, the Marquise had read to Miss Falone that because of her nephew's reputation had deteriorated. She asked if she knew this. She said that he was young and had needs. That's why they tolerated her. It's better to let him sleep with her than with just anyone. I just asked her not to forget to take contraceptives. She said with a shrug of her shoulder that if the girl gets pregnant and disgraces the Duke even more, she will not tolerate it. Rowena said that the Duke really cared about her, and if she becomes pregnant from him, then the Marquise will no longer decide anything here. The woman was furious. She swung her hand and hit Miss Falone in the face with a resounding slap. And now when asked by the Duke, the girl said that she behaved stupidly in front of Mrs. Essex. Killian asked Ms. Asikis over his shoulder to explain what happened. The lady in the hat shuddered. The man narrowed his eyes. He asked how his stupid and ill-mannered mistress showed disrespect for his beloved aunt. The Marquise insisted that her nephew must have understood everything wrong, and the man said that he was just trying to find out what happened in his house. He took off his jacket and handed it to the maid. I asked my aunt what he misunderstood, and I thought it all was somehow strange. The Marquise glanced sideways at the manager, Miss Gertrude, and she swallowed nervously, and she replied that when Miss Falone came down the stairs, she spilled tea on the Marquise's coat. Miss Gertrude insisted that it happened by accident, and the Marquise was afraid. The lady nodded in response, and she said that she was just teaching the girl a lesson. After all, she dared to spill tea on her. Aunt told his lordship that Miss Gertrude was telling the truth. The Duke's squinting did not promise anything good. Rowena said that her hand trembled and she made a mistake. For this, they gave her a slap in the face. She assured Killian that she was fine and asked him not to be angry. The girl grabbed his shirt sleeve, but he unhooked her hand. He asked her to close her eyes and ears and go upstairs. Rowena quickly ran up the steps. Dishes fell to the floor from the cabinet right at the Marquise's feet. She pulled the Duke of Devonshire down. He gasped and said that it was an accident. Font asked him not to do this. The man asked her if she didn't want his mother's tea set who had received it from the Queen. The Duke told her to catch. He claimed that it was his gift for her lesson. He suggested we try again. and he was holding a green cup in his hands. Now the dishes flew into the door next to the lady. Out of fear, she covered her head with her hands and began to scream while crouching. Miss Gertrude rushed to the Marquise's aid, and the Duke spoke with regret that his aunt never caught one. The shelf with the service was empty. Killian said that he remembered that his aunt also liked those swords on the wall. The Marquise hiccuped nervously in fear. The Duke froze, deciding which one to take. But Rowena squeezed him from behind. She asked the Duke to stop. The girl asked to do this for her sake. She said that she was afraid of him. The girl said that it was all her fault, but the man tried to free himself from her and sharply reminded her that he had told her to go upstairs. But she began to go limp, so he had to grab her in his arms to prevent him from fainting. The girl's face was covered in tears. Afterwards, our heroine lay on the bed and asked for a drink. The maid Melissa sat next to her. After some time, Miss Rowena came to her senses. The maid thanked God for the health of her mistress. She offered her to drink some water. The girl took a sip of water from the glass and thanked the maid. But she couldn't understand where she was now. The interior of the room was unfamiliar to her. Crystal chandeliers, sconces, paintings on the walls. Everything was new and unusual for her. Melissa told the lady that this was another estate of the Devonshire family. She admitted that she had never been here before either. Through the glass of the balcony, one could see blooming tulips. Rowena remembered that yesterday she was very excited and on the verge of a nervous breakdown. But I didn't remember how I got here. The maid said that she wouldn't remember. After all, according to the local maids, last night the Duke carried her in his arms while she was unconscious. Rowena tried to comprehend what had happened, and she was interested in the question of what happened next to the Marquise and Madame Gertrude. Melissa hesitated, not knowing how to put it mildly. But then there was a knock on the door. The maid entered the room exactly one step at a time and asked Miss if she was awake. The woman introduced herself by name. Her name was Bianca, and she was the manager of this estate. And Rowena thought to herself that if she was the manager, then she was a member of the same circle as Gertrude. The maid said she would bring breakfast. The girl thanked her, but she fidgeted with the blanket in indecision. Soon a cart with fresh food arrived. Bianca said it was breakfast for Miss. When Rowena looked, she was surprised. After all, these were all her favorite dishes. The maid was glad that the mistress liked everything. The girl got out of bed, but Bianca stopped her, saying that she had brought a tray so that it would be convenient for her to eat. Rowena felt uncomfortable. She asked where the Duke was now. The maid replied that he had left early in the morning to discuss with the king's deputy the taxes collected this year. The Duke told the servants that he would be back for dinner, and Bianca said that if the girl needed anything, she would ring that bell on the table. Rowena hesitated. The maid asked what Miss Falone wanted. She asked me not to talk to her so respectfully, but the girl thought to herself that she had never been treated like this, and she didn't even know how she should have talked to the servants here. There the servants whispered behind her back. Melissa asked why Miss Rowena did this. She assured that she deserved the respect of the servants. Bianca also confirmed this. And she said that besides, the Duke ordered them to take good care of her. And while Miss Falone was here, she wanted her to feel at home. After a while, the carriage drove up to the mansion. Bianca bowed to greet the master. He asked what news there was, giving her his outerwear. Rowena came down the stairs in a chic dress. The Duke approached her. She shuddered nervously at his gaze. The man extended his hand to her, urging Miss Falone to trust him. The girl felt awkward. She touched his hand. He asked if she had already had dinner. She replied that not yet. Killian then suggested having lunch together, and he offered to do it where she wanted, gently caressing her face. Our heroine expected that the Duke would begin to reproach her for her intervention yesterday, and now she happily agreed to his proposal. The bridge led to the front entrance of a luxurious restaurant. All of its windows were on fire, hospitably welcoming visitors. When the girl, accompanied by the Duke of Devonshire, entered the hall, it was empty of visitors. Killian grabbed the cutlery and started eating, and Rowena looked around. The man asked the girl how she liked the new house. She replied that he was simply wonderful and more than she expected. The Duke asked what about Bianca and the servants and maids. The girl assured that they were all so kind to her. Killian replied that he was glad to hear that. Rowena realized that the Duke always gave her the best. And unlike other aristocrats, he did not throw expensive parties or show off his wealth. But today Killian booked a whole restaurant, and it was very strange. Meanwhile, the Duke was dabbing his mouth with a snow-white napkin. He said that from now on, Rowena would live there for the duration of the points. The girl hesitated for a while, but then she asked what happened to Madame Gertrude and the Marchioness of Essex. There was silence at the table. Our heroine began to fidget nervously in her chair. The Duke paused. He twirled the glass in his hand and announced that disciplinary methods had been used against Madame Gertrude, and the Marquise was going on vacation for 6 months to improve her health. The Duke assured the girl that she would never see them again. She groaned and said it felt good, and she praised the heavens to herself. After all, I thought that Killian would treat them more harshly. The main character narrowed his eyes and reasoned to himself. A pure, generous country girl, and the bitch who seduced the man. He tried to understand how much truth was in it, and how much was a lie. He came out of his reverie and addressed the girl by name. He asked her if she knew a man named William. She was silent. He asked why she was silent. Rowena was weighing whether she could tell the Duke the truth. Her lips twitched and her chin trembled. Looking at his serious appearance, the girl decided that he would not believe her. After all, from the beginning he behaved normally, and then suddenly he did something. Like, for example, on vacation. The male employee asked permission to escort her to the mansion, and he offered to take her under an umbrella. The girl gratefully agreed. But suddenly that employee left the island and that store closed. And now she thought, what if she told the truth? Either Melissa will be fired or the publishing house will go bankrupt. Rowena said that William was an old friend of hers. He came to town for a few days, so she met him once. The Duke was surprised why the girl dressed up as a man. She twitched with her whole body. It turned out that he knew about that meeting. She answered that they just had lunch together and there was nothing between them. The Duke clarified that it was her old acquaintance. She just nodded silently in response. Already at the mansion, Melissa was washing Miss Rowena. The water splashed and steamed. The girl was sad. That conversation about William ruined the whole evening. On the way home, none of them spoke. The Duke sat opposite the girl like a pouting owl. He didn't even look at his beautiful companion. And now in the bathroom, she sighed and thought that he was angry with her. Meanwhile, Melissa was combing the girl's hair. The maid was worried about Miss Rowena and asked how she was feeling and why she wasn't feeling well. The girl insisted that she simply ate too much at dinner. Our heroine tried to be distracted by a rose flower in the bathroom. She wondered to herself if Killian had somehow found out about her plan. But then she calmed herself down. After all, if that were the reason, he wouldn't ask her as if he wanted to check something, and he would have already taken action. But then steps were heard in the bathroom. Melissa heard them first and looked over her shoulder. The maid involuntarily gasped and the hairbrush slipped from her hands onto the floor. The girl asked what was the matter. She also looked over her shoulder and stopped mid-sentence. Killian stood behind her, and he looked extremely reserved, which did not bode well. The Duke briefly threw a menacing glance at the maid to leave him alone with Rowena. She immediately ran away from the bathroom. The door behind her clicked shut. The man raised the girl's chin with his fist and she flinched from his harsh address. And she asked his lordship what she did wrong. And he looked at her intently. The girl blushed all over. The Duke pulled her by the hand and holding her by the waist, looked into her eyes without blinking. Killian leaned towards her face. The girl twitched nervously. The man asked her to remove her hand. Water was dripping from the tap. Rowena sat on a soft chair, wrapped in a terry robe, still moaning from languor. Meanwhile, the Duke was fastening the buttons on his shirt. Killian was already stomping towards the door, muttering something. Rowena asked him to wait. She called him by name and hesitantly tugged at his sleeve. The girl asked the Duke if he loved her. I asked him to say that he loves me at least a little. She waited for his answer, and I thought that I couldn't help but ask him about it, because I was starting to doubt. Rowena asked if he was tired of her. Will he leave her? She pulled his clothes, demanding attention to herself. The Duke answered vaguely that he did not know for sure. Our heroine's heart began to beat faster. The girl thought that the Duke had misunderstood her reaction in the restaurant, and if she confesses her feelings to him and tells the truth. But he pulled his hand back and walked away. Without turning to Rowena, the Duke told her to be quieter than water and lower than the grass. He said that then he wouldn't get tired of her. The door creaked and Killian left. The metal chain clanged. The prisoner sat on his knees and the servant held him by the hair. The Duke of Devonshire sat opposite him on an easy chair in an imposing pose. Killian said that he repeats the same thing every time. and he admitted that he was getting pretty tired of all this. The man asked who he worked for and was surprised that it was so difficult to answer him. He came closer, and he assumed that he was dumber than he thought. The prisoner's face and shirt were covered in his own blood. Apparently, a sincere conversation had already been held with him. The Duke assured that he played his subordinate well and stole their information a little, which means he wasn't stupid. His hand cocked the pistol with a click. The muzzle was pointed at the prisoner's face. The Duke was sure that the Southerners were smart, and no one could have thought that they foresaw that he would participate in this. The prisoner assured that killing him would achieve nothing. Killian asked who said he would kill him. A shot rang out, and it was followed by a scream. The man screamed that he had been shot in the leg and howled in pain. The Duke and the servant walked away. The servant handed the master a white napkin. The blonde said that their prisoner screamed like a slaughtered pig. He asked what they should do, and I was sure that this could be perceived as a declaration of war. Killian said they received a gift, and it will be rude if you don't respond in kind. But they still could not solve this through negotiations. The wounded prisoner said that he could predict fate. He said that Killian Maximilian Devonshire would die a terrible death. The Duke froze in place, stopping. The prisoner continued that his mongrel would be allowed to go around in a circle until she... But he couldn't finish. He was interrupted by a shot. The Duke held the prisoner by the hair and asked him to finish the sentence he had started. The servant fussed about next to his lordship. He stood up and said that he had changed his mind. He ordered the body to be chopped into pieces and thrown in the harbor. The blonde ordered the worker to hurry up and clean everything up, and he dragged the body in a bag. Killian wiped the blood from his hands. His face was pleased. The servant only asked not to say that it was his lordship who shot this spy in the head. Killian asked Jenin what he was doing, and he was surprised that he could just stand and watch. The servant frowned. The old man grumbled. He said that he knew that he was just a dog who had not been taught anything in life, but he believed that this was not an excuse to allow the gentleman to get his hands dirty in blood. And he said that it seemed like he paid him a lot more money than he deserved. The blonde clenched his teeth in frustration. He was trying to say something to Mr. Sussex. Baron Benedict Sussex appeared in our story. While Jenin Cleavon, Killian's right hand since childhood, protected him, Mr. Sussex was the one who helped bring it to light. Unlike Jeno, who came from poverty, Benedict was the personification of the aristocracy, and he believed that such scum could not be trusted. The Duke's assistant asked Mr. Sussex, gritting his teeth, if he was really hinting that he would like to die. The gray-haired man replied that the dog had finally begun to show his teeth. Killian barked, "That's enough," and threw away the bloody napkin. He offered to discuss their next step. Benedict said that Glitters, the company they secretly opened for financial activities, began to become increasingly suspicious, and the only way to avoid this is to accept the Queen's wedding proposal. The Duke jerked. He believed that this conversation was a thing of the past, and Benedict was then most against it. Mr. Sussex insisted that there was another reason why Killian should accept this offer. He was sure that every day they attracted more and more attention, and if the Queen finds out that he is organizing a rebellion behind her back, then Miss Falone's safety will be in jeopardy. The Duke clarified that he meant that he should have lived like a royal puppy. Benedict explained that this was not true, but that he could use it to his advantage. Mr. Sussex asked the Duke to pretend to accept the Queen's proposal, and he himself will use the woman the Queen chose for him to distract attention from other things. Killian frowned, and Benedict continued that it is worth doing this if he wants to consolidate his power among ordinary people, so that no one dares to tell him what to do. Even though the Devonshire family was a noble family with a long history, prestige and wealth, it all came to an end when she began to exert a strong influence on Esselwood. The last Mr. Devonshire was a quiet and timid younger brother. He married according to convenience to the one chosen by the Queen. The next year, immediately after Killian's birth, he left the palace saying that he had fulfilled his duty. And 10 years later, he burned alive along with his mistress in a fire. Killian thought it was too suspicious for an accident, and hardly any investigations were carried out then. Benedict wrote Devonshire's wedding contract himself, and was at the center of it all. There was a clause in that agreement that stated that if the mistress asked for a divorce because of the master, then she would receive alimony. But if the gentleman dies from an accident, then instead of alimony, the lady will receive a pension. The Duke thought that there were rumors that the Queen had arranged everything so as not to pay huge alimony payments. Immediately after his mother received restitution, she returned back to her country, and Killian, a child abandoned by everyone, was given land and an island by the queen. She must have wanted to free herself from the guilt of making her nephew an orphan, while at the same time making sure he was under her control. Only she had no idea that the helpless child would grow up and put a gun to her head. Benedict said that Lady Chloe, whom the queen chose, was open to negotiations. That woman wanted to start her own business and get out of the shadow of her own father. And if they help her, then both will benefit from this wedding. And after the wedding, the Duke could give Miss Falone any status he wanted. Killian asked if the man said anything. Benedict said that he was interrogated. And he said that Miss Falone had affairs with William Zeno. The Duke twitched nervously. He said that he was a little late, that he was simply the head of the publishing house to whom Miss Falone showed her manuscripts. Gertrude told him about this. Benedict told his lordship that this was not true, and they have a witness. A servant girl was brought in. It was Melissa. Fidgeting nervously, she introduced herself to his lordship. Killian coldly asked her if she had been watching her mistress's every move. She answered in the affirmative. He wondered if she had anything to report about Miss Philo. The girl shrank all over. She insisted that Miss Falone had an affair with Mr. William. Melissa said that Rowena told her that they were in love as children and she ran into him again. What Rowena thinks is that after the wedding, the Duke will leave her, and so she wants to get as much money out of him as possible before leaving with William. The Duke listened silently, gritting his teeth. That evening it rained like buckets. The mansion stood as a gloomy and inhospitable monster. The Duke paced nervously around the room. He never allowed traitors to go that far. His nanny, who sold all his information to the Queen when he was 14, his friend who took part in an attempt to kill him while he was studying abroad, and the teacher, only pretending to be his mentor, used the Devonshire house for the sake of his career. All those people disappeared without a trace. There were no exceptions. The Duke resolutely opened the door. The girl hummed sleepily. She was already fast asleep. She asked in amazement if it was a dream. Rowena said that his lordship had never looked at her while she was sleeping before. She realized that this was not a dream. The man confirmed this. The girl said with a smile that then she would like to benefit from it. And she prepared her lips for a kiss. Killian knelt on the bed and it creaked. I asked what she wanted to say. The girl asked if he would stroke her head until she fell asleep. The Duke climbed onto the bed and lay down next to him, hugging the girl and caressing her head. But his face remained tense. Rowena said that she was so happy that she didn't want to sleep at all. He said, "Now," and covered her eyes with his hand. Soon the peaceful sniffling of a soundly sleeping man could be heard. Killian stood up quietly. Our heroine woke up that morning in a good, upbeat mood. She thought she had a wonderful dream that night. She dreamily stroked the sheet with her hand. She sat on the edge of the bed, dangling her legs down. 5 days have passed since the trip to the restaurant. The publishing house that wanted to publish her book closed, and the manager said that he didn't know the man named William Zeno at all. Rowena covered her face with her hands and cried. She knew that she had been deceived and sighed. It was a ball of tangled threads, not life. The girl was thinking how she could fix everything now. There was a knock on the door. She said without turning around that she was glad that Melissa was here. Rowena asked the maid to help her collect her hair, but behind her was a man's silhouette. The Duke touched the girl by the ear. He called her by name. She caught his hand with her fingers. The girl looked over her shoulder. His lordship asked her to leave her hair as it was. He assured her that it suits her better. Rowena's heart was jumping out of her chest. The man's touch was so foreign and familiar at the same time. She asked if it was not a dream. The Duke retorted, but as if she herself wanted it. He admitted that he crossed the line last night, kissed her on the head. Rowena felt that now was the time to tell him everything. She thought it was stupid and shameful, but she should have confessed everything now. She began that she wanted to talk to him about what he asked her yesterday. The man gently touched her hand. He told Miss Falone that he had thought about it a lot. And I realized that it was stupid to keep her for so long only as a mistress. Meanwhile, he put a ring on her finger. The girl froze. The central stone sparkled like a diamond. She stammered to his lordship. The man asked from now on to call him by his name, just Killian. She wanted to tell him something about the ring, but he interrupted her. He said it was a gift, and it should have been done earlier. Rowena asked, clasping her hands if he was sure that he wanted to give this ring to her. The Duke asked if she thought that he had confused her with someone else, and he stroked her face tenderly. Rowena began to tremble slightly from an excess of feelings. She threw herself into Killian's arms and pressed her whole body against him. The man squeezed the girl in his arms. He admitted that from the day she greeted him on the train, one question had been stuck in his head. He denied it to himself for a long time and was rude to her. But no matter how much he rejected it, nothing could change his feelings. And all these 5 days he thought about how dear she was to him. The girl said that all this seemed like a dream to her, and she was so happy. Killian suggested that she go to her favorite island and spend the summer there together. He asked if she would go with him. The Duke said that he still needed to finish some business here and promised to come after her later. He kissed her lips. He assured me that it wouldn't take much time. He asked me to wait for him at the rest house. A sea wave rolled onto the shore and immediately retreated. The water was clear and the weather was pleasant. Our heroine stood on the sand and the splashes reached her from the sea tide. The wind played with her hair and blew out the wide skirts of her dress. The girl was sad. Soon a boy of about 10 approached her. He called her Madame. She recognized him and greeted him back. She asked Tommy to simply call her by her first name, Rowena. The boy was sure that it would be rude of him to call a woman of high status by her name. The boy Tommy was the son of the governor of this island. Rowena patted him on the head. She said that she had already told him many times that she did not have any high status. I asked if he came running on behalf of the governor. He answered hesitantly, "No." The boy stuttered and said that he saw her himself and came up to greet her. This island was far from the capital, and once upon a time it was quite deserted. But after Killian developed his business here, the dying economy revived. In gratitude, the islanders are very kind to the Duke and his guests. Rowena asked why the boy should not take a walk with her. She said that she decided to take a walk because the weather was so wonderful, and the boy stomped along the shore next to her. Rowena took Tommy's hand in a motherly way, and he thought to himself that she was probably the most beautiful person in the world and the kindest, even to a child like him. However, the boy noticed that sometimes concern suddenly appeared in Miss Rowena's green eyes. Tommy told the girl that she was the Duke's special guest, and that she will become someone you can't even look at. Rowena cheered up. This, of course, was not what the Duke promised her, and she had been waiting for him on this island for 15 endless days. She thought to herself that she couldn't wait for Killian to arrive, and I was tormented by doubts that if he suddenly decided and something changed in his plans. The boy asked Rowena how soon she and the Duke would get married. The girl shrugged her shoulders nervously. She tried not to think about it. The girl wondered why Tommy decided that she should marry the Duke, but he said that he knew everything. And this was the reason why his father was so busy these days with wedding preparations. The boy said that he heard that the Duke was coming today, and he immediately groaned, afraid that he had let it slip. He asked for forgiveness, assuming that it was supposed to be a surprise. Rowena's eyes widened and she thanked the boy, and she began to hug him in joy. She immediately hurried to say goodbye to him, and already on the run she promised to see him later. On the way, the girl reassured herself that it turned out she had no reason to worry. She decided to meet him at the port. The girl ran as fast as she could along the embankment to the pier. On the pier, our heroine saw the familiar figure of Melissa, and she was delighted to meet the maid. She called her name. The maid asked Miss Rowena what she was doing here, and the girl was catching her breath after a fast run. She said that she heard about the Duke's arrival. His lordship Killian Devonshire came down the stairs. Happiness shone in Rowena's eyes, but when she looked closer, she was shocked. The man carefully led a tall blonde with green eyes by the arm, and he looked at her coldly and indifferently. Rowena was confused and wondered who this woman was next to the Duke. She decided not to jump to conclusions just yet. The girl assumed that she was just a distant relative who was invited to the wedding. Finally, the Duke deigned to turn to Rowena. He told her dryly that he was glad to see her here, formally addressing her as Miss Falone. The man introduced her to his fiancée, Miss Chloe Aberdeen. The girl smiled politely as a sign of greeting and said that she was glad to meet you. What Rowena heard made her feel nauseous. She apologized for not hearing, but Killian felt cold. Our heroine was plunged into darkness. The girl only now realized that the Duke had brought his bride with him. She remembered the conversation between the 3 maids, that he was still in love with his bride, who died 3 years ago and therefore was not yet married. Then suddenly it came to mind that he said that it was stupid to keep her for so long only as a mistress, that he has some business to do and will arrive a little later. And now our heroine stood on the pier and reeled from unexpected news. And I decided for myself since when everything had changed so dramatically. Miss Chloe told his lordship that it was not worth it, stopping his impulse. She said that Miss Falone's shock was obvious. Duke told Melissa to take Rowena inside since she felt bad. She helpfully answered him, and she led the staggering girl away. Tears flowed uncontrollably from Miss Falone's eyes, and the Duke and his bride remained on the pier while their things were unloaded from the ship. The couple chatted happily while enjoying the freshness of the sea. Killian told the approaching servant that they were tired from the journey, and I wondered if the room was ready for Miss Aberdeen. He answered his lordship that everything was of course ready. The Duke asked Chloe's forgiveness for his mistress's bad manners. He insisted that she was a completely uneducated hillbilly. Miss Aberdeen believed that it was hardly a matter of upbringing, and laughingly she assured that she, as a woman, fully understood her. The girl looked from under her forehead at her companion. He was the man she would marry under a business agreement for mutual benefit. That's what she thought when they corresponded. But having met him live in person, her heart changed her mind. She was really worried that her mistress would become the big threat that people described her as. But the Duke didn't waste a minute getting rid of her, and this made her happy. It turned out that she would receive both her father's business and this man's. She took the Duke's arm, and she asked him to show her the island. The Duke's island castle was bathed in sunset colors and looked magnificent. Things were scattered on the floor of our heroine's room. A dress, a fan, papers, writing instruments. Rowena was sitting on the bed under the headboard barefoot. Her face was all tear-stained from tears. The door creaked. She twitched all over, even though she was expecting it. The Duke approached the bed. She shouted at him not to come close to her. He asked why she suddenly started telling him what to do. He told Miss Falone that the scene she made earlier was too provocative. He reminded her that he gave her clothes, food, and a roof over her head. He started touching her face, but the girl pushed him away. She screamed that she didn't need all this. Rowena said that she decided to leave him. On the floor of the room, there was a packed bag with personal essentials. The man grabbed her hand tightly and roughly. I asked where she was going. Rowena demanded that he let her go. Duke Killian mocked his pathetic but beautiful lover, and she was all in tears. He carefully wiped away her tears. He said that his wedding would take place in 2 weeks. Rowena called him a devil, a monster, a cruel, heartless bastard. The girl asked why he gave her that ring, and why did he act like he was going to marry her. The Duke chuckled and said that he had never promised her anything, and he simply gave the gift as he always did before. He asked why she was so surprised. He said that she knew how he felt for her. Rowena insisted that she had always been honest with him. She clenched her fists on her chest. She said that she loved him. She wanted to say something else, but the man did not listen to her. Killian threw her onto the bed with a strong push, and he took the position on top. The girl asked what he was going to do. He said that since she loved him, he asked her to prove it. After some time, the girl was lying under the covers. There were bruises on her neck and chest from hickeys. She was in complete prostration, and Killian was lighting a cigarette. Rowena sat up on the bed. She was unsteady. The Duke told her to take this as a sign of goodwill. The man threw a wad of money in an envelope onto the bed. Told me to tell you if you need more. The girl looked with an uncomprehending look. After a while, she laughed hysterically. Killian asked what was funny about it. Rowena asked if he ever loved her. He answered coldly, "Never." The Duke turned over his shoulder to the girl and said that he was having so much fun. Tears streamed down Rowena's face. From a crack in the door that the Duke had not closed, a strip of light fell on her. The weather was clear and sunny. A dilapidated 2-story house, there was a knocking sound coming from it. A strong fist persistently knocked and banged on the door. The owner of the fist called Rebecca. Soon the door opened with a creak. A beautiful blonde with green eyes looked out. She was clearly tired and sleep-deprived. The woman asked to forgive her, making excuses that her son was sleeping. Rose screamed that it wasn't her problem, that Rebecca owes her rent. I asked when she was going to pay. She threatened that she might stay outside with the child in the cold. The blonde stuttered and insisted that she was very sorry. She made excuses that her salary was delayed, and that she was going to give the payment today. The woman held out a bag of coins. Rose was leaving, And over her shoulder she said that next time if she was late in paying for even one day, she would be thrown out without further ado. The blonde closed the door behind the woman. She was catching her breath. The boy rubbed his sleepy eyes. He asked his mother what happened. The woman smilingly assured Demian that everything was fine, that the hostess just came in to talk about something. The woman apologized that the noise woke him up, but the boy said that he woke up because he felt cold and was frozen. The mother carefully touched the child's head. She sighed heavily. Her son's temperature rose again. She said they would need to see Dr. McWood again. On that terrible night, our heroine's thoughts about death were dispelled by the premonition that gripped her. Rowena thought that she had not had her period for more than the expected period. Fate has made its move. Her premonitions were justified. She was pregnant. And fearing that Killian would take the child if he found out that he was his father, the girl changed her name and moved to a city in which she had no one. They gave her an old closet, and that was enough for her. Being pregnant, she took on any job, which she had never done before. When all the newspapers wrote that Killian Devonshire and Chloe Aberdeen were moving to another country, she gave birth. It was a child who was so similar to that sweet but hated man. The doctor pressed the membrane of the stethoscope to the child's body while performing auscultation. The young man assured that taking medication regularly would speed up recovery. The doctor said that the disease would soon pass, and I was glad to report that the boy's health was improving. The blonde thanked the doctor, smiling. Damien was often sick. The boy coughed and wiped his nose. The birth was attended by a midwife from the slums, who was called in at the very last minute. And from the moment the baby's umbilical cord was cut, he suffered from many different illnesses. The boy asked if his mother would buy him a toy for praise from the doctor. The woman hugged her son and assured him that she would buy him a gift for the holiday, convincing him that he would be there very soon. The child was happy. She didn't have much money, and she decided to just work more in the evenings and find a part-time job. She couldn't stop blaming herself. My son would not have had to go through all this if he had been born in good conditions. The doctor smiled and handed Demian a couple of sweets in bright wrappers. The boy asked his mother for permission to take them. The woman felt awkward in front of the doctor. She assured him that he did not need to do this. Just the fact that he examined the boy meant a lot to her. The man reported that his nephew was about the same age as Demian. He asked me to accept this from him as a sign of respect. The woman's eyes became cheerful and she thanked him. The mother, on behalf of her son, thanked Dr. McWood and asked him to bow. The boy said, "Thank you." The woman said goodbye and said that they would leave already. The door closed behind them with a creak. The doctor asked to be careful. The man heard that Rebecca's husband died in an accident 5 years ago. A local woman saw her very sad and said that she was rushing from place to place pregnant. And then Rebecca settled here. He was worried about her and her son Demian. His nurse came in and called the doctor. He turned around and asked what happened. The woman said that they came to him, and she thought that the doctor should have come out himself, that the guest says that he is looking for someone, but the man had already entered. "Hello?" He asked if there was a Dr. Philip McWood. The other two forced the doctor to his knees. He asked who he was. The guest also sat down. He said he would only ask once. Blonde, green eyes. Almost 30 years. That her name is Rowena Falone, but she most likely uses a different name now. He asked if a woman matching the description had ever come to the doctor. Dr. McWood thought it might be Rebecca, but he did not speak, answering the question negatively. The man held out a business card. He asked the doctor to call this hotel and ask him to come to the phone if he met one. He promised to pay him a good amount. Introduced himself as Zenos Glitters. He assured that they knew his name. The boy greeted Aunt Harriet joyfully. The woman hugged the boy who rushed into her arms. She asked if he slept well at night. The boy's mother stood modestly at the door. The woman asked if Demian obeyed his mother well. Rebecca asked for forgiveness for leaving her son with her again. Harriet assured her that her children enjoyed playing with Demi. Harriet was a manager at a textile factory, and Rowena's support for 5 years. The woman ordered the children to go for a walk outside. She was the one who called the midwife and helped with the work in the factory. And our heroine was very grateful. Harriet said she moved here when she herself was pregnant with twins. They were now colleagues who had given birth around the same time, and she thought that she shouldn't have apologized. And if she needed help with anything, she asked her to just tell her about it. Rebecca was going to work the evening shift just like yesterday. She appreciated Harriet's help. She said that she would pick up Damien tomorrow morning. She bowed with words of gratitude. Harrietta asked what her friend thought of Dr. McWood. The blonde asked apologetically. The woman said, humming in her ear, that he was clearly interested in Rebecca, and asked if she herself noticed it. The blonde denied this and was sure that her friend was mistaken about this. Rebecca said that the man was young and single, and she was a single mother. Harriet said they were only a year apart, that her son is growing. And did the friend think that the child needs a father as a support? She was sure that a man like Dr. McWood, but I realized that it was already time. Harriet asked him to think about her words. The blonde saw a newspaper falling on the floor, and she was about to pick it up. Our heroine extended her hand to pick up that newspaper, but she felt a chill when she saw the image and the headline in it. It said that early this morning, the Duke of Devonshire from Rockford returned to Azelwood after separating from his wife. According to sources close to him, the reason for the divorce was Chloe's infertility. A friend called Rebecca. She was in a slight trance. Harriet asked what was there, and what happened to her face. The blonde sighed heavily. Rebecca bowed and said that she needed to go already so as not to be late. A friend asked her not to overdo it at work there. Our heroine ran home. She said nothing would happen, and that didn't concern her. She remembered him saying, "I was just having fun." Rowena said that this person was no longer in her life. She was scattering things on the floor and frantically looking for something. Rowena told herself that if they ran away, she needed something that she could sell and get money for it. The woman was holding that same ring in her hand. His stone still sparkled. She did not take the money then and left everything she had, but kept the ring. And I did it in case something terrible happened, and she could sell it and run away to another place. There was a knock on her door. She asked, "Who's there?" twitching nervously. A woman's voice asked Rebecca for permission to enter her. It sounded like the voice of Anna, her friend. The woman exhaled in fear and allowed us to enter. Anna came in and was surprised. She said that she came in to ask if they could go together because they worked on the same shift. But when she saw the mess, she was surprised and joked that someone had robbed her. The blonde denied robbery. She explained that she was just looking for something. She said that she was also about to leave to go to work. But her friend had already seen the shine of the jewel. Rowena continued to think about Killian. She reassured herself that 5 years had already passed, that perhaps he lives in another country, and that if he wanted to find her, he would have already done so. The woman told herself that the Duke would not appear at her door after so many years, simply because he was divorced, and she has no reason to be afraid. The stone from the ring sparkled on the cushions. Anna wondered where such a poor woman got such an expensive ring. She deliberately pushed the glass on the table with her elbow. He staggered and fell to the floor, breaking into pieces. The guest made a frightened face. She apologized for her clumsiness to the hostess of the room. Rebecca said everything was fine and went to get a broom. She was afraid that the guest might get hurt and asked her to stand still. Seeing that the woman had left, the guest reached out her hand for the shiny jewel. She told Rebecca she didn't want to bother her. The blonde, who returned soon, quickly swept away the fragments into a dustpan. Worried, I asked my friend if she had gotten hurt by accident. The ring was already clenched in his fist. The guest said that she would like to make amends to her and help her clean up. A short time later, our heroine's shock from the news from the newspaper passed, and everything became the same. Only now she worked more, and I was able to buy my son a gift for Christmas. As was customary before, Damien often spent the night with Harriet. The boy slept in the same bed with her twins of the same age, and the woman next to them knitted warm clothes in the evenings. The boy called his mother in a dream. He cried because of what he dreamed there. The woman was worried about the child and quietly called him by name. There was a knock on the door. Rebecca came for her son. She asked her friend if he behaved well. The woman said that she was glad when the boy visited them and had fun with her children. The blonde thanked her friend. She said that she does so much for her, but she herself hardly gives her anything in return. Harriet, laughing, asked not to speak like that, but to be very careful. When Rebecca left, the woman sat down and exhaled her fatigue. She wondered who Damien's father could be. She was sure that that man must be very handsome if the son looked like his father. If the family was complete and the man was next to her, then Rebecca would not have to work so hard, and Damien wouldn't be so lonely then. Suddenly there was a knock on her door. The woman was scared. She wondered who it could be at such a late hour. The door opened slightly. Her friend Dr. Meckwood was on the threshold. He looked tired and depressed. She asked what brought him here so late. The man apologized, and he asked if Rebecca was here. Harriet said that she had recently left her. The man swore and said that he should have come a little earlier. The woman asked what could have happened that alarmed him so much. He said that some time ago a man came to his clinic, and it seemed that he was looking for Rebecca by signs. The doctor was afraid that he would be watched, so he could not report it immediately. And the man said that her real name was Rowena Falone. Harriet asked if her father was looking for a boy with a woman. McWood said that was out of the question, that he doesn't look like Demian at all, and his name is Zenos Glitters. The woman clarified that this is the one who runs a legitimate gaming house, and Macwood heard that he expanded his business through underground activities, unlicensed lending, and alcohol. The doctor believed that such people were not worth messing with, and he couldn't understand why such a person was looking for Rebecca. He asked him to tell her to be careful. As he was leaving, the doctor looked over his shoulder and asked Harriet to take care of herself. Soon the door slammed behind him, and the woman stood in front of the door trying to untangle the tangle. Unless Glitters was the father of Rowena Falone's son. Could he be the debt collector who was trying to track down Rebecca? She thought that if something happened to Rebecca and Damien, she should have intervened. She clenched her fists. There was a knock on the door. The woman jerked in surprise. They knocked persistently and brazenly. The door shook. At that moment she thought that she needed a weapon. The soft light of cozy dwellings burned in the windows of the houses. It was late evening in the yard. A neighbor told Rebecca that their colleague Anna was missing, that she asked for a salary in advance and disappeared without a trace. She asked the blonde if she knew where she could go. Rebecca insisted that she was not that close to her. She said that she heard that she lived with a man. The neighbor said that Anna left with him, that the police had already been told, but she thought they would quickly be forgotten. The son slept snoringly on the blonde's shoulder. She prayed that Anna would be fine. The neighbor said that she chatted and almost forgot. She took a box out of her bag and handed it to Rebecca. She said the doctor asked her to give it to her. The baby was sleeping at home under a blanket on the bed. Rowena examined the box, realizing that it was for Demian. She had already told the doctor that there was no need. He was such a good person. The woman opened the lid. There were fragrant sweets inside, and between them lay a note on a small piece of paper. She opened it and began to read its contents. Rebecca. On the other side was written, "This is Philip McWood. I know this note took you by surprise. I'll be brief. You are being watched. Please, take care of yourself." But standing on Harriet's threshold was a handsome tall brunette with blue eyes, wearing a hat and an expensive coat. The decoration of the aristocrats sparkled on the collar.
The woman asked if he was Mr. Glitters. Did he ask Rebecca about the debt?
The man said that he had to say that everything was a little different. The woman asked to forgive her. The man assured Miss Dixon that he would like to make her a good offer. It was dead night outside. The waning month dominated the sky today. There was a knock on the door. A woman's voice called Harriet. A sleepy woman opened the doors. She saw an alarmed friend on the threshold. I asked what she was doing here, surprised that she ran here from home. She clarified what happened. The blonde asked if someone came here to her with threats, or maybe he asked where she lives. Harriet said that she did not understand what she was asking her. She assured me that nothing like that happened. The blonde breathed a sigh of relief. The kind woman asked what was wrong with Rebecca and what was the matter. She assured that everything was fine, that she just needed to make sure. The friend swallowed the lump in her throat. She asked Rebecca on occasion, "Hasn't her house become too small for her and her son? That it is old and unsafe, that it is full of alcoholics, gamblers, and antisocial people?" The woman assured that she knew someone who rented out housing not far from her at a very good price, that there should be about the same fee as in the old place. She said she could put in a good word. The blonde thought about it. The place where Harriet lived was much safer than before. If the rent was about the same as what she was paying now, then she could ask for better terms. But she remembered that note from Dr. McWood, and she began to feel a slight trembling. She told her friend that she appreciated it but refused. She said that they would soon move to another city. The blonde bowed respectfully, and Harriet asked her again and could not believe her ears. Rebecca said that if a stranger asked about her, she asked him to say that he knew nothing about such a person. The friend asked her to wait, but she was already quickly moving away. Harriet asked over the man's shoulder if he was sure that Rebecca, that is Rowena, would be safe. The brunette replied, "Absolutely." He approached the woman and handed her a signed check. He said that she could enter any amount she wanted, and she can consider this as payment for looking after his woman. Harriet looked at this with an uncomprehending look. She frowned and said that she didn't need this money, that she only did this because he is the one Rowena needs. The blue-eyed man assured that all he wants is to make Rowena happy. He was noticeably nervous. The woman asked him if he loved her and asked him not to make her unhappy, and he rudely replied that it was none of her business. He said a short good night and walked out the door out of the house. Callian Devonshire of Rockford. The man Harriet knew only from newspapers was Damien's biological father. She was surprised how she had not guessed it before, because the boy was his copy, but it looked like Rowena didn't want anything to do with him. But an often ill child like Damien needed to live in better conditions than now. And then she saw anxiety and sadness in his eyes. Just by looking at him, she could tell with certainty that the man was in love, whether he realized it or not.
A luxurious carriage was driving through the streets of the town. The horses' hooves clattered rhythmically along the paved street.
The right-hand man asked his lordship what they should do, and should they find Miss Falone. The Duke assured that there was no need. He wondered if the person who sold the ring on the black market had been found. The blonde said that it was a woman and it seemed that she stole that ring. He said his people were watching her. The assistant asked his lordship, "Is he sure that he does not need to meet with Miss Falone now?" The Duke was thinking that he was grateful to Harriet Dickinson for befriending Rowena when she had nowhere to go, but that was all. And she asked not to make Rowena unhappy. It was funny and surprising in his opinion, considering that until that moment the woman didn't even know Rowena's real name. Killian asked the assistant what happened to Chloe Aberdeen. He replied that the woman disappeared after signing the divorce agreement. According to their agent, Chloe went to the countryside to recover. The Duke believed that this should have benefited her. The weather was clear and sunny. The Duke of Devonshire's island castle was in all its splendor. Chloe told her husband that since they were married, it would be nice to be faithful spouses. The man simply laughed at this, but that was just the beginning. Contrary to his belief that she would be easy to work with, Chloe turned out to be quite stubborn. She has a new goal: to seduce Killian. She slipped into his bedroom whenever the opportunity arose. There was a time when the man thought that she was forcing herself to do this because of the air he needed, but he felt disgusted, as if he had been cursed. And it wasn't about Chloe. Killian reacted this way to any woman who tried to seduce him, and when her attempts to get attention from him failed, she began to openly cheat. But when the woman realized that her last desperate attempt to provoke her husband did not work, she began to throw scenes at him. She broke dishes, screamed, sorted things out. She screamed at him not to insult her like that. She reminded him that she was his wife. She cried with anger. On the last day of their married life, Killian found his wife in a bathtub full of cold water with a cut wrist. Fortunately, the woman did not lose too much blood and her wounds were not life-threatening. The Duke placed 2 papers on the table in front of his wife. The day the woman opened her eyes, he asked her to choose one of the documents. It was a pass to a psychiatric hospital and an application for divorce. Chloe looked at the documents in complete horror. She did not expect such a turn of events. The Duke said that it was normal that she did not want to get a divorce. He was busily straightening his tie. But he said he couldn't just leave her when she had clearly lost her mind. What if she couldn't make a decision now? He was giving her time to think. And he asked me to let him know through a lawyer. At this point, Killian stood up, making it clear that the conversation was over. But after him, his wife asked about Rowena Falone. Tears streamed down Chloe's cheeks. She asked if he had been cruel to that woman before their marriage. Killian remained silent. He had never remembered this name in the last 5 years. He replied that this was a crazy question. The woman asked him not to try to deny it, that he sometimes calls her in his sleep. I was sure that he hid it somewhere, that for the sake of his favorite, the Duke of Devonshire remains chaste. Killian claimed that his wife was simply having an attack of paranoia, that she really had gone crazy. And he left, slamming the door in the face of the fictitious wife who had been wooing him so much. The Duke walked along the corridor and talked to himself, that these ridiculous accusations of his wife did not even deserve his answer. At some point, weakness overwhelmed the Duke and he fell to one knee. The servant who was nearby was alarmed for his lordship. Killian believed it was some kind of curse that had tightened around his neck and consumed his entire life. The Duke's carriage rolled down the street. Killian drove thoughtfully. He said to himself, Falone. The man remembered the first time he saw a smiling girl, and she introduced herself as Rowena Falone. Ever since that cursed name surfaced, Killian had suffered from endless bouts of dizziness and headaches. Memories came flooding back, breaking the dam. The train departed from the platform, sounding its whistle. It was exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. People were chatting and bustling about as they set off or saw off their relatives and friends. A blonde with huge green eyes was holding her hat with one hand, and in the other she was carrying a large travel suitcase. She was clearly confused. The girl told herself that she was really going to the capital. She convinced herself that everything would be fine with her, and that she would not stay there herself. The blonde entered the train carriage and walked along its corridor, and the large windows were well lit. She looked around and looked for a third-class compartment in which she had a seat according to the ticket she had purchased. Rowena resolutely grabbed the handle, opening the doors to the compartment. There sat a tall brunette in a dark business suit with a white shirt and a black tie. The girl's green eyes looked at the man, and his blue eyes stared into the beautiful gaze of the charming stranger. The girl was scared and timidly apologized. She assumed that she must have mixed up the compartment. She left again apologizing, and in her haste caught her foot on the threshold, tripping over it. The man immediately jumped to his feet like a spring in order to come to the girl's aid in time. A second later he caught her and was already holding her in his arms. The blonde was all embarrassed and immediately blushed. The brunette told Miss instructively that she should be more careful. The girl was completely frightened and the stopper took her. The man suggested out loud that she was lost. She briefly confirmed this, saying that she was looking for a third-class compartment, and she hiccuped in fright. The man experienced an unusual feeling, and the girl admitted that she was simply shocked by how cute he was, and she immediately covered her mouth. But it was too late. The man laughed openly. It was not the first time for him to hear compliments from ladies. They rang the bell signaling the departure of the train. The conductor carriage entered. He asked how he could help. The brunette asked to escort the lady to her compartment. He asked the girl to follow him. She timidly thanked him. The man said goodbye to Miss. The blonde looked around and introduced herself as Rowena Falone. The man introduced himself and said his name was Killian Devonshire. The train rushed on its way, taking its passengers into the distance along the track. New acquaintances were sitting in the dining car. The blonde said that someday she would like to sit in a restaurant on the seaside and enjoy a great lunch, so that her favorite flowers would stand on the table, and her beloved man would sit opposite her. The man said that her dream was wonderful, and I wondered what her favorite flowers were. She said she loved Edelweiss, that in the country where she was from there were plenty of them everywhere. She said it was a very calm and beautiful place. However, she never left him until now. It was her first time going to the city, and she was very nervous and excited. Killian said that she should adapt well to city life. He asked for forgiveness and asked how old she was. The girl said she was 20, and in response she asked Mr. Killian how old he was. The man answered briefly that he was 28. The interlocutor exclaimed in surprise. She insisted that she would never have thought it because he looked younger. The girl asked Mr. Killian what his favorite fruit was. She herself said that she liked raspberries. The brunette insisted that it was time for him to go. He said that he was pleased to talk with Miss Falone. She politely answered him in kind. As he left, the man looked over his shoulder. Rowena was left sitting alone. She even became a little sad. In front of her stood a whole plate of untouched pies. The brunette entered his compartment and slammed the doors behind him. She was thinking as she walked around her compartment about Rowena Falone. He thought she was an attractive girl, but he thought she was too young. There were too many reasons why she wasn't right for him. She was a 20-year-old child, and it was obvious that she was not even from a middle-class family. This must have been their last meeting. But even in the carriage on the way home, after he got off the train and after he arrived at his townhouse, he could not get the girl out of his head. And the remnants of conscience that still existed did not last long. The Duke was sitting at the table in his office. He called the butler's name Rowena Falone. He said that the girl was young with blonde hair and green eyes, that she went to the capital recently. He asked her to find it for him. The middle-aged woman obligingly bowed in response. But when Killian received the answer, he was shocked. They wrote that this person was a high-class courtesan who used her blonde hair as a weapon, that she is now on the run because she got into huge debts. The maid asked if it was worth asking someone to bring that person here. The Duke thought for a moment. He remembered how the girl talked with a smile about her homeland, and that she never left those places. It's the first time she's traveling so far. That's why she's so worried. The man was amazed at such an impressive performance. He couldn't think that he couldn't get her out of his mind. His gaze darkened. He told the woman that there was no need, and he allowed her to be free. The maid said that this woman looked similar to the late Lady Angela, that this girl could be useful to him, that the queen would undoubtedly try to arrange his marriage again. The Duke thought that he would like to kill her because she had deceived him, but if he could use her to get out of trouble, he wanted no part of it. And when he sees her in his bed one day, he might lose all interest in her. He thought it was a good idea, but he wanted her to suffer a little first. The girl sat in the pouring rain, clutching her travel suitcase. She cried from hopelessness. Killian sat sadly on the edge of the bed. There was a knock on his room, and his senior assistant entered. He was holding a piece of paper in his hands. The blonde asked his lordship why not see that girl from the train again. The Duke asked who exactly he meant. The servant said that he meant Miss Falone, assuming that the Duke was thinking about her now. He placed an envelope on the table, and on top of that was the same ring with a diamond as the center stone. The blonde said that after their investigation they found a clue. That lady settled in a secluded town with a couple of factories. That his people tracked down a suspicious doctor, and he led them to the house of a woman who worked in a factory. He said that Rowena rented a dilapidated villa and had been living there for some time. That they also found this ring on a nearby black market. The Duke was thinking, a dilapidated villa, a textile factory. Even if the woman was unfaithful to him, she would still remain his mistress. And if she took the money he gave her, then she would not have to work for the next 10 years at least. His temples were pounding. This splitting headache pierced his heart. Night was falling on the city. Thousands of stars lit up in the dark blue sky. The carriage drove quickly down the street, its wheels creaking. The servant told his lordship that they had arrived at the hotel. The Duke looked tired. He was getting out of the carriage. And he said that along the way he got lost in useless thoughts. A horseman was rushing towards them at full gallop. He shouted from afar, addressing the Duke. The guy soon got off the horse. He said that the woman who pawned the ring was found dead. Killian was amazed at how quickly events unfolded in this quiet town. The Duke mounted his horse. The assistant asked His Grace to wait, but the gentleman had already galloped away. The man reasoned out loud to himself. It was one of two things. Either the queen has something or there was an enemy within. And whatever it was, Rowena was in danger. A dilapidated villa where our heroine lived. The door creaked and the exhausted girl entered the room. A little boy met her. He walked to his mother, yawning and asking where she had been. The woman insisted that she needed to talk to Harriet about something. Mother told Demian that they might soon have to leave here somewhere far away. The boy asked how far, and he was upset that this meant that he would no longer see Aunt Harriet, Lawrence, and Rosalind. The woman wanted to answer her son, but there was a knock on their door. She did not react, but they knocked insistently. Then she ordered her son to quickly go to his room. The boy asked a bunch of questions. Why? Who was at the door? But his mother reassured him that it must be the mistress. The boy agreed. The woman closed the door behind him. She reassured herself that it couldn't be Killian. What even if he divorced his wife, for the reason that she could not conceive? All he has to do is find another woman and get married. She convinced her that it couldn't be him because he had no reason to look for her, because he didn't love her. The door was opening, and a male silhouette appeared on the threshold. He addressed her as Miss Falone. Rowena told herself that this couldn't happen. There was horror in her eyes. He said that he understood that for her he was like a demon or a reaper of death. The woman was amazed. He examined her home. I wondered out loud what a miserable life she lived. Rowena asked why he was here and took a step back. Killian tiredly sat down on the nearest chair. He suggested that she start all over again. The woman said that the last time they saw each other, he threw money at her when he left her. The Duke assured that he had not forgotten anything, that he threw her away and it was his job to get her back. He took out a lighter and lit a cigarette. Rowena was indignant and was against smoking in the room where her child lives. She demanded that he put out the cigarette now. A boy looked in the door. He called his mother. Through the crack, he saw that the guest did not look like the owner of the room, and he looked with curiosity at who came here. The Duke was stunned. The mother ordered her son to go inside. Then she opened the front door and screamed at Killian to get out of here and out of her house. Her heart was beating fast in her chest. She didn't know if the Duke had time to see Damien's face, and did he realize that the child was so much like him? The Duke sat and laughed, holding his head. The chair creaked under him. He said that he did not expect more honesty from her, that he would never have thought she had baggage now. He said she must have met another man during their breakup. Rowena ordered him not to come close to her. The Duke took another step closer to her, officially called her Miss Falone, and he grabbed her chin with his hand. I asked when she became so impudent. The woman stammered that he was invading her home, and therefore he cannot expect kindness from her. He assumed it was because of that man, and he brought his face closer to hers. Their tongues touched together. He licked her with an animalistic thirst to possess all of her, but the woman found the strength in herself and hit him, pushing him away from her. There was a mark on the Duke's face. A man's hand slammed against the wall behind the woman. The Duke asked Miss Falone to make a choice. Tears flowed from her eyes. Killian offered her to become his lover or end up on the street with the child.